Well, we are live outside the International Convention Centre in Cape Town, where the 7th administration will be sworn in. Around 400 MPs, again, as we have been saying this morning, that if the MK party is part of those MPs that will be sworn in, there will be about 400 MPs that will be sworn in later on today, which of course will usher in the election of the Speaker of the National Assembly, and then also the Deputy Speaker, and later on the President of the country. Also an indication here from the so-called Progressive Caucus. They are set to have a press briefing, and these are political parties including the EFF, Al-Jama, UDM, UTA, ATM, as well as the PAC. They say that the leaders of the parties that have formed the Progressive Caucus will address a conference under the following details. It will happen at around 9 o'clock later this morning, which will essentially be just an hour before proceedings are expected to start here. So we'll have to wait and see what they have to say about this government of national unity. Essentially, they had a meeting late last night speaking about this government of national unity and its makeup. Let's bring in our analyst for this morning, Rekgotsofetse Chikane, who has been our analyst during the elections as well, and now we are back. A very good morning. Thank you so much for
thanks for having me.
For making time for us on this historic day as well.
Yeah, it's a really amazing day for democracy in my mind, and it's a day where we see whether our democracy can hold together as well.
And essentially what it means is that this marks the end of single-party dominance, officially.
Yeah, it means our constitution was designed to be what we would describe as like a competitive multi-party democracy. Well, you're not really competitive if one person is winning all the time. In fact, when one person wins all the time, the institutions of the country start getting twisted in a manner that they shouldn't be. So now we're seeing that actual test about what democracy looks like when you don't have one party winning, where one party has to compromise with other parties. They have to talk to other individuals. And the question that we have as citizens is whether our views now, which are no longer dependent on the ANC's kind of benevolence and their policy position, how other parties can utilize their position to get all South Africans represented in Parliament, not just in kind of symbolism, but also in policy work.
Yeah, the difficulty for the ANC in all of this. Yesterday, the Secretary General of the ANC saying that, listen, this is uncharted water for us. We've never done this before. We never had to have to share power at a national level, but now we have to do it. I wonder whether the party would be able to do it, and what it means for a party that has been dominant for the past 30 years. So now all of a sudden at a national level this is, where policy is also being implemented and policy is being formulated, will be able to share power.
I mean, there's multiple levels that the ANC now needs to contend with. It's the quality of your MPs to be able to negotiate rather than just kind of like toe the political line. That's going to be very, very interesting to see how the ANC does that. The other question is about how democratic centralism either falls apart or strengthens during this time. So can you keep all your MPs voting along the same line? Can you vote with your party on every single issue? And the other one is the uncomfortability of not being able to chair every single committee in Parliament. This idea that someone else will be dictating the policy agenda for certain issues in the country. And that uncomfortability will trickle down all the way down to provincial level as well. What I know is that this is not fully uncharted territory. There have been coalitions in this country, maybe not at a national level, but we've got blueprints of where it does work and we've got blueprints of where it doesn't work. The question is about which blueprint the ANC is going to choose.
Yeah. And then, of course, the conversation about whether it is a government of national unity, whether it is not a government of national unity. And I just quickly want to go back to what Fikile Mbalula said last night, that essentially they believe that there are certain things that they would be able to achieve through a government of national unity, which the ANC couldn't achieve when it had that single party dominance. But is this a government of national unity?
So technically, no. So government of national unity is usually formed when there's some sort of conflict in the country. So we're thinking about Kenya during the 2000s, or there's some sort of crisis in the country. Now, the ANC losing its majority does not constitute, at least in my mind, a conflict or crisis. It's just a democratic process. To have a government of national unity, you need a super majority of parties. We're talking about 80 to 90% of elected officials being part of this one organization. And then technically, the distribution of positions and power goes according to the proportional size. Back in 1994, that unity was based off the ANC having 66%. It's very, very different at 40%. So technically on paper, this would just be another form of coalition, but a coalition that doesn't have clear ideological synchronies, right? So no clear ideological lines of we all agree on certain issues. And that's going to become quite challenging. It's easy to form it today. That's not the difficult part. Voting in the president and seeing who becomes president, that's the easy part. It's about how do you hold a coalition like this together when the big issues start confronting them where they're diametrically opposed.
Some former MPs that are coming back, including the former finance minister, Melusi Kikaba, as well as Mmusi Maimane. And the interesting thing, though, about Mmusi Maimane is that he used to be the leader of the official opposition, the Democratic Alliance that is going into this government of national unity, that has agreed to the government of national unity. I wonder what sort of role do people like Mmusi Maimane play in a parliament of this nature that is very different also to the parliament that he left when he left the Democratic Alliance? Yeah,
so when you're part of the Democratic Alliance as the official opposition, you're the official voice of the opposing views towards the ANC or the ruling government. As a smaller party in parliament, it doesn't mean you can't do anything, right? So we saw in the last parliament, ATM, which was the party that brought up Phala Phala in the first place, ATM managed to use its influence in interesting ways. The question for Mmusi Maimane is he's going to hit like a fork in the road. And the model that I see him following is like a Bantu Holomisa model of does your gravitas allow you to have the voice of the country? Right, so that when you speak, the country truly feels like, okay, maybe we should listen to him, even though your share of the population votes is quite small. Or are you going to play a backbencher role in Parliament? Now, based on Mmusi's personality, the things he said, his campaign trail, the policies that he wants to push, I believe he'll be very active in Parliament, but he needs to get used to the idea of not being dominant in Parliament.
Yeah. Well, probably do like it's a broken president in a broken country.
Yes, we'll see one of those speeches again. I am so sure of it.
That is the Obama of Soweto. Remember that he was the Obama of Soweto. And then finally also Jacob Zuma. So the party secured the third biggest position, the third largest number of seats in the National Assembly. And then also in various provincial legislatures, they've secured a couple of seats. Of course, KZN being the highest number of votes that they've secured there, over 45% of the votes. How should we understand the leadership role of Umkhonto weSizwe's leader, who is Jacob Zuma, who is not in the National Assembly, but continues to play a leadership role? You made the example a bit earlier on about Herman Mashaba.
Yes.
How do we compare the two?
Yeah, so most parties in our country, their leaders will also sit in Parliament in one way or another. We're now seeing models of governance where party leaders don't sit in the legislature. So Herman Mashaba has quite explicitly said that I won't sit in the legislature, I want to be on the ground building action SA. I think the same can be said for President Zuma in particular. I think his influence is how do you maintain the structures and create structures for MK, right, without the distraction of Parliament? How do you make sure that you hold MK in place in KZN, expand it into Gauteng and other provinces? And I think he'll be doing a lot of the groundwork, even though it might be from Nkandla in particular, sending other people to do the groundwork. But I think it's highly important. Some people would want him in Parliament. I think he's stronger outside of Parliament. That influence that you don't have to constantly be in the national eye in parliamentary seats, but people still pay gravitas to you. People will still come to you. And I think MK's major focus right now after today's proceedings will be how do we get to our electoral conference? How do we get structures in place for the organization so that we can expand going forward?
Rekgotsofetse Chikane, our political analyst for today. He is the friend of the anchor and he has been the friend of the anchor during our election coverage as well. So he'll continue to join us throughout the morning. It's back to you, Nadedi.